Welcome to Eve May's Poetry Corner.
The Great Slave Auction, also called the Time of Weeping, was on March the 2nd and the 3rd, 1859, and it was a sale of enslaved Africans held at 10 Breck Racecourse near Savannah, Georgia. Slaveholder and absentee plantation owner Pierce Mies Butler authorized the sale of approximately 436 men, women, children, and infants to be sold over the course of 2 days. The sales proceeds went to satisfy Butler's significant debts, much of it from gambling. The auction is regarded as the largest single sale of enslaved people in US history, my lord. The Butlers of South Carolina and Philadelphia were owners of slave plantations located on Butler Island and St. Simon's Island, which was just south of Darien, Georgia. The patriarch of the family, Major Pierce Butler, owned hundreds of slaves who labored over rice and cotton crops, thus amassing him the family's wealth. Butler was one of the wealthiest and most powerful slave owners in the United States. Upon his death, his biggest dilemma was which heir to leave his wealth. He was estranged from his son, so Major Butler left his estate to his 2 grandsons, Pierce and John. Pierce Butler was devoid of business sense, and his grandfather would not have approved of his personal habits. He frequently engaged in risky business speculations, which resulted in a huge financial loss for him in the crash of 1857. Oh dear, poor rich boy. However, it was his addiction to gambling that landed him in most trouble. He had accrued a considerable amount of gambling debt over the years. To satisfy his financial obligations, the management of Butler's estate was transferred to trustees, so that was bad, right? At first, the trustees sold Butler's Philadelphia mansion for $30,000, as well as other properties, but this was not enough to satisfy creditors. The only commodities of value that remained were the slaves he owned on his Georgia plantations. So, he had to sell them. Butler had the impending sale advertised in the Savannah Republican and the Savannah Daily Morning News by Joseph Bryan, a popular slave dealer. The advertisements ran daily except on Sundays. Up until the last day of the sale, you could read about it. The text of some of the ads was, "For sale, long cotton and rice Negroes, a gang of 440 accustomed to the culture of rice and provisions. Among them are a number of good mechanics and house servants. All will be sold on the 2nd and 3rd day of March at Savannah by J. Bryan." Unusually, it was advertised and announced right from the beginning that there would be no division of families. Well, I guess we should have been grateful for that. The slaves were brought to the racetrack 4 days before the auction started, allowing buyers and inspectors to take a look at them. On the first day of the sale, there were about 200 buyers present. Fierce rains kept many of the potential buyers away. As a result, the auction began 2 hours late. During the day of the sale, Joseph Bryan was in charge of feeding the slaves and keeping them in good condition. The slaves were brought to Savannah by steamboat and train and were housed in the stables at the racecourse. They were huddled together, eating and sleeping on the floor. All family members were put into the same stall. In the stalls, they had nothing but the hardwood floors to sit and eat on. The slaves were given small portions of rice and beans, and sometimes cornbread, lovely, thanks, to eat over the 2 days. Although skin colour often played a role in the price a slave would sell for, in this sale it was not a factor, since all the slaves were the colour of their African ancestors. This means there were no slaves of mixed heritage. The slaves had a variety of skills, i.e. shoemaking, cooperage. I had to look this one up. It is the skill of making barrels and casks. Blacksmithing, carpentry, cooking, and some of them had been taught to use machinery. The skilled slaves were sold for more and were specifically sought out by the buyers during the auction. The buyers poked, pinched, and fondled the slaves. They also opened their mouths, inspecting their teeth. Slaves were also examined for ruptures or defects on their bodies that might affect their productivity. In total, 436 persons were advertised for sale in the catalogue, but only 429 were sold. Those not sold were either ill or disabled. The 2-day sale netted $303,850. The highest bid for a family, a mother and her 5 grown children, was for $6,180. The highest price paid for an individual was $1,750, and the lowest price was $250. You might like to know that $303,850 is worth $10 million today. So how do we know all of this? Well, Mortimer Thompson, a popular journalist during the time who wrote under the pseudonym Q.K. Philander Doesticks, memorialized the event. Initially, Thompson travelled to Savannah, infiltrating the buyers, pretending to be invested in purchasing slaves. After the sale, he wrote a long and scathing article describing the auction in the New York Tribune titled, "What Became of the Slaves on a Georgia Plantation?" Guys, this is simply why we cannot forget the price our ancestors paid so we can be free. This is why Black Lives Matter. Anyway, I digress. There is a gruesome twist to this historical event. Tom Pate, a Vicksburg trader, bought at the sale a man, his wife, and his 2 sisters with the guarantee that they were not to be separated in accordance with the terms of the auction. In disregarding the agreement, Pate sold one sister to a Pat Summers, a fellow trader, and the other sister to a private citizen in St. Louis. Summers, finding out later of the sales agreement in Savannah about families not being separated, returned the girl to Pate, demanding his money refunded. An argument ensued, resulting with Summers being shot and killed. 10 days following Summers' death, his nephew killed Pate, and he himself was killed during the confrontation. The feud escalated to humongous portions and continued until every man bearing the name Pate was killed. Wow. After the slaves were freed, some of them returned to Butler Island to work for wages, and some bought land in the area. What a twist to that tale, eh? Oh, this slave trade. We can never forget the slave trade. See you next time. Bye.